everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel, or if you are new here then hello, thanks very much for clicking, hope you are glad you clicked. So today's video is going to be about being a new mum. If you've watched my previous videos, I was about 4 months pregnant last time I did a YouTube video. It was sort of like a life update, it was a Q&A with me and Adam was in some of it as well, and now I'm going to be updating you on how my life has been going since I've had Oscar. He is just over 4 weeks old now and he is the absolute love of my life. So I put a question bar on my Instagram story and asked you guys to ask me some questions to see basically what people wanted to know, and there was a lot of questions. People are nosy when it comes to pregnancy and labour, giving birth, newborns, your body parts and stuff like that, so I'm very happy to answer it all. So yeah, so the first question was something you took in your hospital bag that you're so glad you did. I feel like with any new parent, when you go in to have your first baby, you just overpack anyway. I'm a massive overpacker in general. If I go away for a few days, it looks like I'm moving in for the month. Like, my motto is I'd rather be caught with too much than not enough. So with my hospital bag, with Oscar's stuff in it, with my stuff in it, with Adam's stuff in it, something that I'm really glad that I took. Oh, do you know, I was glad that I took it all because I had everything that I could possibly need. And obviously with the COVID situation, Adam was allowed in with me, but once he was in, he wasn't allowed back out again. Unless it was to the car, like he wasn't allowed to go home, he wasn't allowed to go to the shops or anything like that. So we had to take everything we could possibly need. So if that meant bringing 4 times as much as something just in case, then that's what we had to do. And something I'm really glad that I took would be, I took loads of toiletries with me. I know that might sound stupid, like, oh, is that the thing you're really glad you took? But when you have given birth, and I had quite a long labour, which then resulted in surgery, I was like sweaty, I felt really disgusting, just things. So like body wash, shampoo, conditioner, a razor, things like that. That first shower that you have after having your baby is like cleansing your soul. It is, you just feel so disgusting, so sweaty. You've been sat in the same gown for like 3 days. You've been sat in the same bed and you just like, yeah, it's not nice. Definitely take toiletries with you, although you might be like, oh, I won't, I'll just take dry shampoo. Trust me, take shampoo, conditioner and body wash and deodorant, and you will feel so much better once you've used it all. Something you wish you took that you didn't. I'd say the only thing that I wish I took with me that I didn't would probably be my dressing gown. I get hot really easily, so in my flustered packing my hospital bag state, when I found out I was going to go in to be induced, I found out sort of like less than 24 hours before that I was going to be induced, and I didn't know what, so I was in the hospital Monday night, and they told me at 8 o'clock that I was going to be induced the next day, but I had to phone up at 8 o'clock in the morning to find out what time I was going in. So for all I knew, I could be going in less than 12 hours. Obviously it happened that I didn't go in until the following evening, but I would definitely say take your dressing gown, because it's just sort of like it's a very stressful situation. Obviously you're so excited to meet your baby, but it is really nerve-wracking, really scary, and your dressing gown's sort of like a home comfort, and it's just sort of nice to be comfortable and have something that makes you feel a bit better while you're in a scenario like that. What is the hardest thing about being a new mum? There's going to be people watching this that have got toddlers that are going, you think the newborn stage is hard, like you've got no idea. But obviously I'm a new parent, so this is hard for me. It's hard for any new parent. You are doing something that's completely unnatural to you, and although it can come naturally to you, it is still something that's very difficult, and you learn and you adapt, and no one gets it right the first time. I mean, no one gets it right the second time. You're just sort of learning as you go. I have to edit that out. So I would say the hardest thing is probably the guilt, and I don't know if that's because I'm sort of like quite an anxious person anyway. I do have quite bad anxiety, especially when it comes to my child. The hardest thing I would say is definitely the guilt. Every time I do something, I think, have I done that right? Do I put his nappy on properly? When he cries, do I pick him up properly? Do I comfort him properly? Do I feed him the best things he could be getting? So yeah, it is the guilt, definitely. I think it's more so for a mum, because obviously you've given birth to them, you've grown them for 9 months. So in a lot of ways, obviously, when they're inside of you, you know they're as safe and as getting everything as they can be. When they're on the outside, although it's the best thing ever having them there after a long 9 months, it is really difficult to sort of believe that you're doing everything the best way you can. So yeah, guilt is definitely the hardest thing for me personally. How is the recovery after a C-section, and what is your birth story? So obviously the two sort of go together. Like I said earlier, I went in to be induced on the evening of the 8th, and I was induced at 7 o'clock at night, and then just literally sent back to my room because they weren't expecting, with your first baby they don't expect anything to happen very quickly. So I was induced at 7 o'clock at night with a method I believe that's fairly new, which is plastic rods inserted into your cervix, which is wicked. It was not comfortable, it was not nice. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it was okay. For me it wasn't. It was really uncomfortable. I had gas and air for the induction. That's how uncomfortable I was. Apparently I said to Adam, I'm hard as nails, I'm like Phil Mitchell. That's how high I was on gas and air. So yeah, I was induced at 7 o'clock at night and then sent back to our room on the maternity ward, or prenatal ward, I think it's called, I'm not sure. It's where you go before you have your baby, basically, if you're being induced or you're being watched or something like that. And I was then tossing and turning all night because I started having quite bad cramps. I started bleeding quite a lot, which for induction is to be expected. It's nothing to worry about. Baby was monitored all throughout the night, so I had a very bad night's sleep that night. When you're induced, they check your blood pressure every few hours, so I was being woken up every few hours, but I wasn't really sleeping anyway. I was then in slow labour. So I was already 1 centimetre dilated at the point of induction because I had a sweep the night before in the hospital. I was then in slow labour, so I wasn't in active labour's 4 centimetres plus, so I wasn't in active labour at that point, but I was in slow labour from about 5 o'clock that morning, and then I was taken down to the delivery suite at, I want to say 10:30. I know Adam will know because Adam remembers everything. I remember very little because I was just drugged up from literally the minute I walked in the door. I want to say about 10:30 in the morning. We were under the impression that I wasn't going to be taken down to the delivery suite until 24 hours after the induction, which would be 7 o'clock on the 9th, 7 o'clock in the evening on the 9th. But someone came to our room at 10 o'clock in the morning and said, right, we're going to go down to the delivery suite. We're going to see if we can get this baby going. And so we were like, shit. We thought we had all day to sort of relax and prepare ourselves. We didn't. So we went down to the delivery suite at about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I had 3. So this is sort of like a trigger warning. It gets a little bit graphic here, so if you don't want to listen to the graphic bit about induction and things like that, and a little bit of goriness, then skip on a little bit. I'll put the timestamp here of where you can go to if you don't want to listen to this bit. So yeah, so we went to the delivery suite, and I then had 3 separate midwives try and break my waters. What was it for? A lot of people were rummaging around with me while I was there over the course of a few days. I had 3 or 4 separate midwives try and break my waters, which they then came to a conclusion after about half an hour, and me being very uncomfortable, that my waters had already broken and I hadn't noticed. They say that they go up to your cervix to break a bubble, or like a balloon if you like, and break the waters. And they could all feel Oscar's head. So they were saying that your waters have already gone. Do you not remember when they'd gone? Because you're at risk of infection if it's been over a certain period of time. And I was just so baffled. I said, I'm sure I would know. I'm sure I would know if my waters broke. And I didn't. And it was really, really strange. But yeah, so they decided to start me on a hormone drip, which would bring on the contractions, and essentially they're trying to bring out Oscar. The hormone drip helped sort of put me into like extreme active labour. I was contracting sort of like every minute or so, and they were lasting very long and they were very uncomfortable. That's sort of how it stayed until about 9 o'clock at night. So I was in active labour for a good 6-7 hours at this point. And it got to the point where I was really, really uncomfortable, and the epidural is something that I wasn't massively keen on just because of the risk that comes with it. Obviously with childbirth and things like that, you are at risk whatever you do, whatever medications, drugs you take, for pain relief and things like that. There is an element of risk in all of it, but the epidural is something that I was quite scared about, so I was not massively keen on having it, but I was really struggling with the pain, and not worried to admit that I was really struggling, and the Gasnier just wasn't doing it for me anymore. So I said I was due to be checked. They check you every sort of like few hours to see how far you're dilated, and I said to Adam, the next time that they check me, if I'm not past, I think I said if I'm not past like 7 centimetres, then I'm going to get the epidural because I'm really struggling. After an hour or so, a midwife or a doctor came in to check me, and she said, I'm really sorry, but you've not progressed at all, so we're going to turn the hormone drip off because Oscar's heart rate kept dipping. So she said, just for the safety of the baby and for the safety of you, we're going to turn it off for a little bit and just leave your body to sort of labour on its own and see how far you get and things like that. So she said, we're not expecting anything to happen. The hormone drip sort of speeds it up. If we turn it off, obviously things are going to slow down. That wasn't great news. I mean, we were sort of expecting to have Oscar by that point. But obviously we weren't, and that's not how things were going. So for the safety of Oscar, obviously we decided to turn it off, and they said, we'll check you again at 11:30, I think they said, 11:30 at night. So I'd been in active labour for a good 12 hours at this point. So at about 11 o'clock they came back in to check me, and she said, we're not expecting you to have progressed any further than what you were. I think I was about 5 centimetres at the point before. But I was checked, and the midwife said, I don't want to jinx anything, but I think you're about 8 or 9 centimetres. So me and Adam were like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, that means he's on his way. That means it's not that far away, because obviously you start pushing at 10 centimetres. So we were like, oh my God, please get the hormone drip back on. Like, let's get this show on the road sort of thing. And a lady, so at this point I'd had the epidural, so I was managing the pain a lot better. And I was then so happy to hear that Oscar might not be that far away. So I was checked again by 2 different midwives, and they said, yep, you definitely 8 centimetres. So we're going to now get the drip back on and see how it goes. They said, we'll check you again in an hour, see how it goes. Within that hour, Oscar's heart rate kept dipping a lot, getting to the point where they actually sort of interjected within that hour and said, it's not a good idea to sort of keep this drip on because he's getting really stressed out. They were checking me and feeling for his head, and his head had not moved any further down within the last 5 or 6 hours as where it was in the daytime, which isn't to be expected. They expect at 8 or 9 centimetres. That's Oscar grumbling. After sort of like a lot of discussion with a couple of midwives and a doctor and like the clinical lead, I think they call it, they came in and said that it was in mine and Oscar's best interest to have an emergency caesarean. His heart rate kept dipping, and it wasn't safe for us to keep turning this drip on and off because he was getting really stressed out. At that point, that's sort of when shit got real. Obviously you go in expecting, hello, come here. We have a very grumbly baby. Hello. You go in obviously to the hospital expecting to have your baby naturally, if you like, obviously unless you have an elective C-section, but it's not something that I was expecting. In fact, I would say that it was my worst nightmare, to be perfectly honest. Not because I was scared of the pain or anything like that, but because I was scared of the recovery. I'm a very active person. So even sort of like up until the day before I went in to be induced, I was still walking OB. Shall I just wait until you being fed and then we won't have to worry? Oh, you farted now. Oh, Daddy's getting you some milk. It's on its way. So even to sort of up until the day before I went in to have Oscar, I was walking with Obi. Obi is literally a year old and has the most unbelievable amount of energy you can ever imagine. So to have a scenario where I would be not incapacitated, but sort of like not able to do that for sort of like a good 3 or 4 weeks was something that scared me quite a lot. I'm very independent, and to have to know that I would accept a ridiculous amount of help in terms of sort of like even getting up out of bed, going to the toilet, things like that. That was something that worries me quite a bit, but it was something that had to happen. So I was wheeled down to theatre at about 1 o'clock. And so at that point the labour had been sort of like nearly 13 hours long. And yeah, it was fairly straightforward once we went in there, apart from the fact that I could not stop shaking. The amount of sort of pain relief that I was on, the thought of having a C-section, which is major surgery, for how nervous Adam was, I was just shaking like an absolute leaf.
Oh, I wasn't that nervous. I was holding it together.
You were crying. You cried.
I wasn't crying.
You cried.
I was holding it together.
Holding it together, but you did cry. Yeah, I was wheeled down at about 10 to 1, I think, and Oscar was born at 1:14, weighing £6 7 ounces, which is small-ish. It's not tiny, but it's sort of like smaller than what full-term babies tend to be. But yeah, no, I was really well looked after, and although the C-section is not something that I will be doing again in a hurry, it was obviously how Oscar came into the world, and it was fine. The recovery has been okay. The first couple of weeks, the first maybe 2.5, 3 weeks are definitely the hardest. I wasn't able to get out of bed or sort of sit down on the toilet without it taking a very long time. Adam would have to pull me up off the sofa or help me sit up in bed so I was able to feed Oscar. The recovery isn't great, but I mean, I'm 4 weeks post C-section now, and I have been on 4 or 5 decent walks. So there's, where I live, there's a big park that takes about an hour to walk around, and I've done that about 4 or 5 times with Obi and with Oscar in the pram as well. So I feel capable to do that. I'm not sort of like in any massive discomfort. I get the odd twinge and sort of pain, but that's to be expected. I'm not taking any pain relief at this point. I was taking morphine and paracetamol and ibuprofen for the first 3 weeks, sort of like back to back, so I was literally not on no pain relief at any point in the first 3 weeks, but I'm feeling okay now. I'm having my 6-week check next week, so I am looking forward to being able to go out on my own, I guess, drive again and things like that, because I've been relying on a lot of people to get places so far. But yeah, not too bad. Who was your birth partner?
Me.
Adam. Obviously I've spoken about Adam being there. Because of COVID, I was only allowed one birth partner, which obviously would always have been Adam. He is Oscar's dad, as far as we know.
As far as I hope, you know.
Obviously, if COVID wasn't a thing and I was allowed to, I would have taken my mum with me as well, but wasn't allowed, so Adam came. Were you scared being left alone with him for the first time? I found it so nerve-wracking with my son. I think I've only been on my own with him once. Twice. I think I've literally been on my own with Oscar once or twice for an hour, maybe 2 at a push. In the first couple of weeks when I wasn't able to go out walking, Adam took Obi out and I was left on my own for an hour and a half with Oscar, and I honestly think he just slept. He either slept or he got a bit grumbly and I picked him up and gave him a cuddle, or I fed him. Yeah, it is nerve-wracking, but I wasn't sort of like hysterical, if that makes sense. I was just something that I had to do, so I just sort of tried to be level-headed about it. Did I feel the C-section? Now, I don't want to scare anyone. Yeah, you can feel it. It's not necessarily agonising pain. It's like you can feel people rummaging around, which is, it's uncomfortable. Like, whether you say you can't feel it or not, I could feel them rummaging around, and I did have to have extra pain relief during the C-section because I did get very uncomfortable to the point where I was getting quite panicky, yeah. That's a good word. I don't know, obviously the adrenaline and the fear of being in that sort of scenario anyway. I don't know if that was making the pain seem worse than what it was, but definitely need that extra pain relief. It's a lot of rummaging around. It's not comfortable, but it's how your baby comes into the world. So I can imagine that any parent that's done it would say they would do it again for the sake of having their baby around. So, baby number 2 plans?
Not for a while yet.
No way. Not yet. Being entirely honest, I would like to have another baby when Oscar's sort of a couple of years old. Whether that will still be the case or not, I don't know, which is why we're saying that we're going to wait at least a couple of years so then we can decide and make sort of a decision based on what sort of toddler he was, or he will be. So yeah, definitely not for a few years yet. Obviously I know plenty of people that have children very close in age, which obviously if that's what you want to do, that's great, but it's just not something that we want to do. So how are both of your parents with him? For my mum and dad, Oscar is their first and only grandchild. So they are absolutely besotted. Not that you wouldn't be if it wasn't your first and only, but they are absolutely besotted by him. They're both so hands-on with him, and they want to see him as much as they can. They want to obviously hold him and cuddle him and stuff like that. My mum and dad are in our support bubble with the current COVID tier 4 lockdown situation, so we are legally allowed to see them. For Adam's mum and dad, it is their fourth grandchild. Adam's older brother Chris has 3 children, so Oscar is not their only grandchild, but he is the youngest. Yeah, there's 2 girls and Oscar is now the second boy. When we get to go up and see them and introduce Oscar to all of Adam's family, so he can meet his uncles and aunties and things like that, and his cousins, that will be really nice. Is Oscar bottle or breastfed? Was help offered with your choice, and was your decision supported? So when I had Oscar, I did try to breastfeed him in the hospital, but had problems with him latching on. So his first feed was about an hour after he was born, and he was fed formula for his first feed. We took it just in case. Obviously there was issues. I was offered a lot of help by the midwives on 3 or 4 occasions while we were there after his birth, and even after, when I went for his 5-day check after I'd obviously been discharged from hospital and was at home. I was offered breastfeeding support then, but did just have, again, the same issues with him latching. He's got a very small head and had a lot to contend with. So is what the midwife actually said, wasn't me.
Okay.
But yeah, so he's had problems. So I am expressing and formula. So I guess you'd call that combination feeding. He has mostly formula. Yeah, I do try and express as much as I can because I've had trouble with him latching on. Yes, my decision was supported. I feel like it's not professionals. They do say, yeah, breast is best sort of thing, but all of the midwives that I've had throughout my pregnancy and since Oscar was born have been really, really nice and supportive, and just said it's a load of rubbish. A fed baby is the best baby. So however you decide to do that is totally your decision. So obviously initially I would have liked to have been able to breastfeed him, but Oscar needs... Oh, nice. He's just been sick on his dad. So obviously my main concern after he was born wasn't to get him to latch on to me, it was just to make sure he was fed and he was okay. So however I did that was irrelevant really. What is something that you have used after birth that has helped you that other mums should buy? I'd say the most helpful thing that we have is if you bottle feed, so if you formula feed your baby or your child, the most helpful thing that I'm so glad that we've got is a prep machine. You literally put a bottle under it, it puts boiling water in, you put the formula in, mix it up, and then it tops it up with cold water so it's the perfect temperature. It literally takes 45 seconds to make a perfectly heated bottle, and when you've got a screaming newborn, it is an absolute godsend. So yeah, definitely if you're formula feeding, I would say get a prep machine because they will save your life. Is it true you can't poo after you give birth? Yeah, I think the general quota is it takes a few days anyway, but with a C-section, because they obviously, like I said, rummage around your insides, you can get quite bad trapped wind, and they say to allow sort of a week to 10 days to go to the toilet after you give birth, especially after a C-section. I think I was about 4 or 5 days, which is unusual for me personally, but yeah, I had I had really bad trapped wind. I don't know if I know it's sort of a thing, but I don't know of anyone else that had it. Took about 4 or 5 days, and I had horrendous trapped wind in my ribs and in my shoulder, to the point where I had to sleep sitting up, which I mean I did have to anyway because of the C-section. I couldn't lay flat on my back or on my side because it was too uncomfortable. Yeah, so no, you can't poo after you have birth. You can't poo after you give birth. It took me about 5 days, and that first poo is horrendous. So that is me being totally honest, keeping it real. It is horrendous. It takes about half an hour to get it out. So yeah. What is the most special thing about having a baby? As cliche as it sounds, having something that you created, something that you, and obviously depending on your situation, depending on your circumstances, the person you love, you obviously created that baby together, so that is the nicest That's definitely the nicest part about it, and seeing who they look like as well, and the fact that Oscar looks more like me at the moment, I'm liking. How did polycystic ovaries impact your pregnancy? So I don't know if I've answered it in the previous video, but I do have polycystic ovaries and was told that conceiving a child could be quite difficult for me, and weight loss obviously aided my chances of having Oscar. I'm not entirely sure if polycystic ovaries impacted my pregnancy in any way differently to what it would have done, obviously, to a woman that doesn't have polycystic ovaries. I had horrendous sickness. I had shingles. I had dizzy spells. I don't think it impacted it any differently, to be honest. I think I just had a bit of a rough pregnancy, and that's just how it was. Obviously, polycystic ovaries can impact your chances of falling pregnant, but as far as I'm aware, it didn't impact me, or I'm not sure how it would impact someone during their pregnancy. So these questions now are for Adam, so I'm going to get him to answer these.
I'm in the frame. Oh, hello, everybody. How are we all doing?
So,
Go on.
what was the worst part and the best part about your labour for Adam?
The best part was
Tired.
when we finally got to go home, because it was... How many days? What day did we go in? We went on a Tuesday.
In on the Tuesday evening and we left on the Thursday evening. I mean, considering I had Oscar in the early hours of the Thursday morning, we were advised to stay and give me a bit longer to rest, but we were both just desperate. We were both...
Wait.
Oh my God.
Be quiet.
We were both desperate.
Is he farting?
We were both just desperate to go home, so we decided to go home.
Yeah, that was probably the best of the time, so finally getting to go home. The worst was probably when Liv was... Sorry, just bear with us while we wait for him to decide to start groaning. You right there, pal? Yeah. Worst part was probably when Liv went in for a C-section, because it was at that point where I kind of had to call her parents, had to call my parents and say, listen, this is what's happening. Liv's going in for a C-section, and I had to hold it together because I was pretty scared as well. Kind of like fears of losing Liv during it, because I know there's potential risks to C-sections and stuff like that, and the fear of like if that happened and whether Oscar would be okay, or whether, you know, I'd have to raise Oscar by myself and stuff like that. Those were all the fears.
Which is obviously worst case scenario. But
yeah,
it's
they're worst case scenario.
Obviously goes through your head.
Yeah, but beforehand, I was like having bad dreams about like losing Liv in childbirth and stuff like that. So I was kind of, it was all my worst like nightmares coming to true.
Yeah.
So luckily, Liv got through the C-section. Everything was fine, but I was inside.
I'm still kicking.
Yeah, I was inside shitting myself, but we got there in the end.
What is the best part about your pregnancy for Adam, and the worst part about your pregnancy?
Best part about the pregnancy.
Was there a best part?
I don't think really was a best part. I'll be totally honest with you. Your hormones are more, you know,
heightened,
rife, so you're more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily a bad thing, but obviously during heated arguments, that's, you know, and you are much more kind of. I can't really push you and prod you as much as I could before you were
Can't
pregnant.
take a joke.
You can't take a joke. Yeah,
Can't
your
take
sense
a
of
joke when
humour.
you're pregnant. Have no
really
sense of humour.
So there was not a lot of good things about pregnancy. Obviously there was stuff like the gender reveal we did with family and stuff like that. So we still managed to do that during just after lockdown.
It was when lockdown had been eased. It's when lockdown had been eased, so we were allowed to do it.
Matey.
Grumble guts.
Yeah, other than that, I wouldn't say there's an awful lot of good things about someone being, you know, actually pregnant and going through a pregnancy. It's not an easy thing to go through. So there's not necessarily an awful lot of good things to talk about. There's more cons to pros, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'd agree with that. Or worst part, sorry.
Oh, worst part of your pregnancy.
Careful. Careful now.
I suppose the times where like Oscar, his heart rate would like slow and you'd have to go and get checked, and those like worrying times.
Yeah, so I had 4 episodes of reduced movements in the space of about 10 weeks. So yeah, that was horrible.
Yeah, and I'd be at work or whatever, and I'd have to leave work early and go
Just get
straight,
a phone call to say I'm going to the hospital.
Yeah,
and...
go straight to the hospital and kind of not even be able to go in. That's actually, there you go. That's probably the worst part actually. Now, not being able to go to any of the scans. So obviously, through we kind of through the entire of 2020, of where you were pregnant.
Yeah.
I couldn't go to any of this. We went to a couple. We went to a couple of
two.
private scans.
We had 2 private scans. Yeah, one
that I was able to go
one
to.
at 7 weeks and one to see what gender he was.
Yeah.
And that, yeah.
But other than that, like, I couldn't go in, so that wasn't nice leaving Liv to do it all by herself and not really feeling part of it. Like, it just wasn't the same, I guess, and it wasn't. You kind of feel like you missed out on a lot of that part of your son's life because that build up to your son arriving shocked me more because obviously I'd not been around it, and then going straight to and being allowed in the hospital during the pregnancy, during the labour. That was the first time I'd really been around
involved in any of it,
and involved. Yeah. So that came to as quite a bit of a shock to the system and stuff like
obviously,
that.
Obviously, we're very fortunate with the fact that I had, apart from obviously some bad parts, I had a very healthy pregnancy, and obviously all of my scans were okay, and all of the times he was checked were fine. Obviously, the worst part about the fact that he wasn't allowed in is for all the women that obviously go in to have their babies checked, to have their babies scanned for the first time or the second time or the third time, and they're on their own when they're told that there's no heartbeat or there's a problem or things like that, and that is sort of like when you need somebody there with you, and however many women up and down the country during COVID have had to get that news on their own, and that is obviously horrendous.
Yeah.
Who's had the smelliest poo, and have you and Adam taken on certain roles?
Who's had the smelliest poo?
The one
I had the worst. I had the first.
We had to bin a bodysuit.
That's the one I had, which is the worst one.
The worst one.
But ever since then, we kind of just take it in turns. On his poos are relatively the same now. They're all chicken korma style poos. Roles, I'd say we'd share. So because I'm back at work now, and we decided that we needed a bit of a system because obviously I get up quite early and Liv isn't at work at the moment, so it makes more sense for Liv to get up and do the earlier feeds in the mornings, and I do the feeds before we go to bed and maybe like the first feed during the night. So that's what we're doing at the moment. But I say we share the workload. You know, when I'm at work during the day, there's not an awful lot I can do. You know, I'm working from home and I can try and be helpful as much as I can, but I'm working, so there's not, you know, I can't really drop everything and go and help Liv with the baby. If I'm desperately needed, I'll go and help. But other than that, I'm just able to go to my little sanctuary downstairs in my man cave and hide away from my responsibilities. Is that all the questions? So that is all the questions. Thank you very much if you asked one. It made the video obviously a lot easier for me. And a lot longer. And a lot longer, but who cares? So thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe if you're new and you haven't already. So yeah, thank you very much and see you next time. Bye. Adios.